Imagine walking into a city with so much gold that you could hand it out just because someone smiled at you. Not once, not twice, for weeks. Imagine so much gold moving through your hands that an entire regional economy collapses behind you, and it takes over a decade to recover. Now, imagine that's not a fantasy. That's Tuesday for one man in the year 1324. His name was Mansa Musa, and by most modern estimates, he wasn't just rich. He may have been the richest human being who has ever lived. Richer than Rockefeller, richer than Carnegie, richer possibly than anyone alive today. Here's how a 14th century African king ended up in a league of his own. First, some context on how he even got the throne. Musa was born around 1280 into a ruling family of the Mali Empire in West Africa. He wasn't first in line for power. He became king almost by accident after the previous ruler, Abu Bakr II, set sail across the Atlantic on an expedition and simply never came back. Musa was named deputy in his absence. When the king didn't return, the throne became Musa's. He took the title Mansa, meaning something close to King of Kings. And what he inherited wasn't a small kingdom. It was already one of the largest empires in West African history. But under Musa, it grew even further. Historians estimate his empire eventually stretched across territory that today includes Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, and parts of several other modern nations. Now, understand where the money came from. Mali sat on top of something almost no other empire on Earth controlled at that scale: gold. Historians estimate that during Musa's reign, Mali produced roughly half of the entire world's gold supply. Not half of Africa's gold, half of the world's. Add in control of the trans-Saharan salt trade, and you have an economy most medieval kings couldn't even comprehend. Salt, at the time, was worth close to its weight in gold in some interior regions because it was that scarce and that essential. So Musa controlled both ends of one of the most valuable trade routes on the planet. Here's the thing. Wealth alone doesn't make history remember you like this. What made Musa legendary was what he did with it. In 1324, Musa set out on a pilgrimage to Mecca, a religious duty for Muslims called the Hajj. But this wasn't a modest trip. Chroniclers described a caravan of roughly 60,000 people. Soldiers, officials, servants, and by some accounts, thousands of enslaved attendants, each one reportedly carrying gold. Camels loaded with more gold bars than most kingdoms had ever seen in one place. Some accounts even describe Musa's senior wife traveling with hundreds of her own attendants. This wasn't just a journey. It was a moving demonstration of wealth, stretching for miles across the desert. Here's what's interesting. The real damage happened in Cairo. When Musa passed through Egypt, he didn't just spend gold. He gave it away to the poor, to local rulers, to anyone he crossed paths with. Historical accounts say he was so generous that the local price of gold dropped sharply because there was suddenly so much of it flooding the market. That means one man's generosity may have destabilized Cairo's economy for over a decade. Try explaining that to a modern central bank. An Egyptian historian named Al-Umari, writing not long after, interviewed people who remembered Musa's visit and described the gold crash in detail. He noted that gold's value in Cairo hadn't fully recovered even 12 years later. Musa reportedly even had to borrow money on his way back home after giving away so much on the way there. Some historians argue he actually borrowed it at high interest, essentially clawing back some of the gold he'd just flooded into the market. That's not just generosity. That's someone who understood, even by accident, how markets work. Here's the part nobody talks about. Musa wasn't just spending, he was building. On his way home, he brought architects and scholars back to Mali with him. One architect, Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, is credited with helping design new structures using imported building techniques. He commissioned mosques, he funded madrasas, including the now famous Sankor Madrasa in Timbuktu. Timbuktu, under Musa, became a center of Islamic scholarship, attracting students and scholars from across the region. Manuscripts on law, astronomy, and medicine were collected and copied there, some of which still exist today. This wasn't just a rich man showing off. This was wealth converted into institutions that outlasted him by centuries. Here's a detail most people miss. The famous traveler Ibn Battuta visited Mali years after Musa's death and still described a functioning, wealthy, orderly empire. That means Musa didn't just spend money. He left behind a system that kept working without him. Here's the payoff, though. Word of Musa's wealth didn't stay in West Africa. It reached European mapmakers. A famous 1375 map, the Catalan Atlas, depicts Musa seated on a throne, holding a massive gold nugget, a visual signal to sailors and traders that unimaginable wealth lay somewhere across the Sahara. For over a century, that single image shaped how Europe imagined Africa's interior. Some historians even argue it quietly influenced European interest in searching for new trade routes to West Africa. A rumor of gold, drawn on a map, outliving the man who inspired it by generations. Here's where it gets complicated, though. How rich was Musa really in today's money? Some estimates put his net worth around $400 billion once you adjust for gold, land, and resource control. For comparison, that would put him well above any billionaire on a modern rich list. But historians are quick to point out that comparing a 14th century agrarian gold economy to modern markets is more art than science. There's no stock ticker for medieval Mali, no public balance sheet, no shareholders, no quarterly earnings call. So the number itself is less important than what it represents. A level of resource control so total, so far beyond his era's frame of reference, that modern minds reach for a number just to make sense of it. And that's really the broader thesis here. Mansa Musa's wealth wasn't measured the way we measure wealth today. It was measured in control. Control of gold, control of trade routes, control of an empire that connected West Africa to the Islamic world, and eventually to Europe's imagination. He didn't just have money. He had a near monopoly on one of the most valuable resources on the planet, at a moment when the rest of the world had no idea it existed. Musa ruled until his death in 1337. He was succeeded by his son, and later his brother, but neither matched his reach or his reputation. Within a century, the empire began to fragment, pressured by rival states and shifting trade routes. But the stories about Musa didn't fade the way the empire did. If anything, they grew. Each retelling added a little more gold, a little more spectacle, until the historical man and the legend became difficult to separate. And maybe that's fitting, because separating fact from legend has always been part of understanding Musa's story. What we do know from multiple independent chroniclers across different cultures is that his wealth was real, his generosity was real, and its impact on Cairo's economy was real. The exact number is guesswork. The scale was not. So the next time someone debates who the richest person in history really was, remember this. It probably wasn't a name from a modern rich list. It wasn't measured in stock options or IPOs. It was a king who crossed a desert, gave away a fortune large enough to crash a foreign economy and permanently changed how the world understood wealth itself. Not through a headline, not through a press release, through gold carried on the backs of thousands of camels across a desert in the year 1324. That's not a myth. That's Mansa Musa. And 13 years after his caravan passed through Cairo, the price of gold there still hadn't fully recovered.